Would Inspector Science contact the control room?
It's our Beatles-In My Life tour. My name's Richard, I'm your guide for this morning. I'm the author of the book, The Guide to the Beatles London, and also hold the title, Beatles Brain of Britain. So those sounds rather derogatory, but I think it means to know a fair bit about the Beatles. That's what they told me anyway, won the prize up in Liverpool. Before we go off on our tour today, I need to tell you a few things about it. For the first part of the tour, we're walking around the Marylebone area of London, seeing places like where the Beatles filmed the opening scenes of A Hard Day's Night in 1964, see both Paul and Ringo got married, see where John lived with Yoko, infamous Two Virgins picture taken, see where Paul lived with Jane Asher and wrote Yesterday, their Apple shop on Baker Street, and a few others. Then of the tour, we've gone the underground up to St John's Wood, see the outside of Abbey Road Studios, and walk across the world-famous Abbey Road crossing, just as the Beatles did on their album cover in 1969. Unfortunately, Abbey Road's not in walking distance, all the other places we see today, but I'm sure you'll agree, you can't have a Beatles tour in London without visiting Abbey Road. They're going to Paris and not seeing the Eiffel Tower. Good the trip to Abbey Road, this tour can be a bit longer than other London walks, normally finish on about 1:15. Be the tour before then, normally get to Baker Street Station before going to Abbey Road between 12:30 and 1:45. But I'm sure most will stay on for Abbey Road, set the highlights of the tour. Okay, well before we go off and see the sights, I want to tell you about the Beatles' early days, and why we do a Beatles tour in London. Well, surely the Beatles were from Liverpool. Well, of course they were from Liverpool, it's what, 200 miles from here on the northwest coast of England. They all grew up in Liverpool, with early concerts there too, which they played at the Cavern Club some 280 times in about 2.5 years. They also made several trips to Hamburg in Germany, spending like months of time there and playing like 6 hours a night, 7 days a week. And as John Lennon once said, I was born in Liverpool, but I grew up in Hamburg. In many ways, he was right, both musically and otherwise. Use imaginations on that one. Well, by late 1961, the Beatles had already done several thousand hours of stage time, set the best group in Liverpool and Hamburg. Well, that really could have been it for them. Didn't have to go any further than that. Gleasia had broken up out of sheer boredom, playing in the same clubs time and time again. But you could say, had a lucky break. So in Hamburg, they made a record, backing a guy called Tony Sheridan, on a song called My Bonnie. When they came back to Liverpool, they started talking about their records at the Cavern Club and all the other places they were playing. And a guy called Raymond Jones went into a record store in Liverpool called Nems to ask for a copy of My Bonnie. The guy I asked the record from was Brian Epstein, the head of Nems Records. Brian's shop had the reputation in Liverpool being the best for records. One reason being that Brian ought to satisfy his customers. Apparently, he didn't know about My Bonnie, didn't know about the Beatles. So he did some research to make to find the group that made the record, the Beatles, was playing at the Cavern Club. It's only a few hundred yards from his shop. So remember the night of 1961, Brian Epstein went to the Cavern to see the Beatles, to ask about their record and where to get it from. Of course he saw them perform as well, was totally mesmerised by them, and almost immediately decided to become the Beatles manager. Of course Brian's big job as their manager to get the Beatles a UK recording contract. Fit with the simplest job in the world, wouldn't you? The Beatles? No, it wasn't. Because at the time all the record companies in England were firmly based here in London. And for that reason, most pop stars were from London as well. Comedians were from Liverpool, not pop stars. That's a general opinion of the day. And Brian had to make several trips to London to see record company people. Initially he was turned down for everyone he saw. Playing notoriously Decca Records. Apparently said to Brian Epstein, we don't like the Beatles sound. Groups of guitars are on the way out. That's wrong, is all I can say to that. But they weren't the only ones. So many people turned the Beatles down, and most people had given up hope. But Brian kept on going. He kept everyone he met. The Beatles would be bigger than Elvis. And everyone laughed. But finally someone didn't laugh. That was George Martin, head of Parlophone Records, part of EMI. Luckily for us in the world, George Martin saw something in the Beatles everyone else had missed, and signed them to Parlophone. And their first single, Lumby Doo, just came out in October of 1962. And their first #1, Please Please Me, in early 1963. And after that, well, the Beatles had to move to London. So the music industry was so based here, all the television and radio stations, record companies, and everything else. And in those days before the motorways are built, it taken, 8 hours to drive from Liverpool to London. So it made much more sense to relocate to the London area. So had homes here, of course made all their records here too. And the first place we're going to see was actually right where we're standing. It's right here at Marylebone Station. It's where the Beatles filmed the opening scenes of A Hard Day's Night in 1964. In fact, at the very start of the film, they're seen running down the street just by the side of the station. Let's go over there first, literally from the Beatles' footsteps in A Hard Day's Night. This way. Well, right at the very start of A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles are seen running down Boston Place, this street by the side of the station. They run down here towards us, being followed by all their fans. This is where George Harrison falls over, right at the start of the film. Was actually a complete accident. Wasn't in the script. In fact, he brought Ringo down with him, much to the amusement of the others. Decided to keep us in anyway, so they thought it looked quite good. Luckily, George got it right first time there. And most of the people running after the Beatles that day were actual Beatles fans, who somehow have found out they were going to be filming. Just came along on the off chance of catching a glimpse of their heroes. But a few of the lucky ones were actually chosen to appear in the film itself. And as quite a few of those fans got signed photos each, if they kept them, there were several £1,000s now. It's not bad payment following your heroes down the street, is it? Here's a picture showing that scene in the film, with George falling over at the front. And here they are running by the end of the station here. See how little the station has changed since 1964. Look, even the railings are still here. And a few coats of painters then, of course, but still there now. Well, eventually the Beatles run round the corner and into the station itself. And we'll go in a moment. But you have time for pictures here first, if you like. Wants to recreate the scene? No? Get out of the way. Right, it's now, 55 years ago since the Beatles filmed here in the station. Of course, it has been modernised quite a bit since then. But during those days, the main entrance used to be through these doors right here. M&S Simply Food, a branch of Marks and Spencer's. Used to be the main ticket office and entrance hall. Used to be 3 telephone boxes through there that John, George and Ringo are seen using as the fans run past them into the station. Here they are using those telephones, a very famous still from the film. Regrettably, the telephones are no longer there. They removed them, converted it to the shop. A real pity. Very nice photograph for you, but never mind. Well, eventually the Beatles end up on platform 1, over in that direction, and seemingly live on a train from this station. I did actually get on a train here, it didn't move anywhere. Reason being, this station was closed. They filmed here on a Sunday, but no trains are running in those days. They did that, of course, to bother commuters on normal work days. When they left from Paddington, it's supposed to be the biggest secret ever on British Railways. For every station the Beatles stopped at on their journey, there were fans waiting for them, and exactly the right place, and exactly the right time. How they found out to this day, no one knows. But Paul McCartney called Beatles fans the eyes and ears of the world. Because sometimes the fans knew where the Beatles were going to be before the Beatles even knew themselves. There's other things you can see in the station, also in the film. There's now Starbucks down there, for instance. It was also called Starbucks in those days. Just the cafe of the station. But John, George and Ringo are seen looking out of there, again as the fans run past. Later they jump over some barriers down that end and land on the luggage cart, taking a few yards on that before they jump off, also to avoid the fans. And here's John leaping over the barrier, and Ringo and George already on the luggage cart. That was taken down there. We're probably wondering what Paul McCartney is doing all this time. Haven't mentioned him yet. Well, Paul's actually sitting on a bench in the middle of the station here, just reading a newspaper. He's not bothered by the fans. He's wearing a disguise, a false beard and moustache. I have to say, I think the fans were told to leave Paul alone. You see from this picture here, I think most people recognise Paul McCartney, don't you? He's wearing a wig or dark glasses or both. I think the hair and the eyes are a dead giveaway. Well, A Hard Day's Night became a lot more successful as a film. Anyone dared hoped, including the filmmakers, United Artists. So they made the film of the Beatles, get the soundtrack album for America, into a surefire winner, an album of Beatles songs, and they were right. The record came out a week before the film. It sold so many copies in that week, the film was in profit, even reached the cinemas. Can't be too many films you can say that about. So the film itself for them was also an afterthought. They made it very quickly and very cheaply. They also worried the Beatles wouldn't be popular when the film came out, because no worries there, of course. That's not to say it wasn't made well. It's made very well. Some of the best filmmakers in the UK working on it. It's the guy in charge of photography. It's called Gilbert Taylor. He's a very eminent guy. He later did a very similar job, a well-known sci-fi film, the name of Star Wars. Yes, you've probably heard of that too. Roger Hard Day's Night looks so good. Of course, the Beatles very good in it as well, really helped by the scriptwriter Alan Owen. Alan actually spent some time on tour of the Beatles in late 1963, got to know them very well. But some of their dialogue in A Hard Day's Night is actually taken from real press conferences they're given in real life. Well, because he knew the Beatles weren't actors, they were musicians. Didn't have the time nor the inclination to learn pages and pages of script. He gave them one-liners to learn, easy to learn, made the film very sort of snappy and fast-paced as well. All worked very well. If you don't believe me, buy the DVD. It came out again, 5 years ago, its 50th anniversary. Sure, it's streaming all over the place as well, so look out for A Hard Day's Night. Okay, well, the next place we're going to see is where both Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr got married, where civil weddings take place. This is where two of the Beatles got married. The first Beatle to be married here is Paul McCartney, who married Linda here on March the 12th, 1969. Paul was actually the last Beatle to be married, at least for the first time, and outside the office that day were many hundreds of Paul's fans, crying their eyes out. His last chance had gone in marrying a Beatle, or so they thought. In fact, so many people were outside that Paul and Linda had to go in the back way, around all the trash cans, to get into their own wedding. See by this picture here, I know the most romantic way of starting your wedding day. There are still lots of the people that were outside need to respect Linda later on. Well, the second Beatle to be married here was Ringo Starr, who married actress Barbara Bach in April 1981. They met on a set of a film they were doing together called Caveman. So I must admit it's not the best film of all time. At least Ringo met his wife to be on the set. Ray got married only a few months after the death of John Lennon. So it's really nice having something positive in the Beatles world after months of misery mourning John. So not only was Ringo getting married, but Paul and George also turned up to the wedding. She had three Beatles in the same place for the first time in many years. This is the picture all fans wanted to see, the three of them reunited. Here pictured their wives too, a very nice Beatle family group. Here's Ringo and Barbara coming out afterwards with their bridesmaids down the steps here. Barbara's dress was designed by the Emanuels, or to design Princess Diana's dress, her wedding to Charles some months later. Certainly got the best designers. But Paul McCartney came back here 7 years ago to get married again. It's his third wife, Nancy. He got married in the same place. He married Linda. That's a very happy marriage, of course. 8 years different tragic death from breast cancer. What's the dream that Paul got married would have been John Lennon's birthday, October the 9th. But if that was planned or not, he hasn't said. Here's Paul and Nancy coming out after their wedding. Nancy's dress was designed by Stella McCartney, who's Paul McCartney's daughter. They call them Britain's top fashion designers. The chief photographer that day was Mary McCartney, Paul's eldest daughter, and Britain's top photographers. Then Mary took the picture of the Queen, and the Queen became our longest serving monarch in history. We took pictures of the Queen for that. Was a very proud father. When his daughters, very much the height of them, this is where I got married about 15 years ago. No coincidence he got married to him, a great big piece of flags. Strange, there's no crying girls outside that day.
Got a picture of that?
I know. Okay, the next place we're going to see is where both Ringo Starr and John Lennon lived for a while, and where John and Yoko had a rather controversial picture taken in 1968. On the other side of the road there's some new English heritage blue plaques to be erected to John Lennon, just unveiled a few years ago by Yoko Ono. More about the plaque later on. That apartment is number 34 Montague Square. It just covers the basement and ground floor to the right of the main door. It's a rather small split level apartment, but lots happened here in a short amount of time, with far-reaching repercussions too. The first Beatles to live here was Ringo Starr, who moved in early 1965, around the time he married his first wife, Maureen. Soon after moving in, Maureen gave birth to their first son, Zach, because Zach is now a drummer like his father. He plays with The Who, amongst others, very much in demand. Also living here, Ringo and the other Beatles are given the MBE medals by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. And Ringo and Paul, who live nearby, left from the apartments to go to the palace. Here they are waiting on the steps to be picked up by the Beatles chauffeur. The steps right here. Ringo and his family lived in the apartment a short time. They bought a house out in Weybridge, close to where John Lennon was living. But Ringo kept hold of the apartment so he could come back here where the Beatles are playing their late night recording sessions and nearby Abbey Road. When he wasn't using it though, Ringo let various friends use it. And Paul McCartney used the basement for a while as a small recording studio. Paul could not read or write music notation, had to make tape recordings of the songs he wrote to play to the others. He did lots of work on songs like Eleanor Rigby down in the basement here. Well, by mid-66, Paul had moved the studio out. The apartment was vacant again. So Chas Chandler, the former bass player of the Animals, moved in. He moved in a rather good guitar player he discovered playing a few weeks earlier in Greenwich Village, New York. So he'd become his manager and bring him to England. That guitarist, of course, was Jimi Hendrix. And Chas and Jimmy lived in the apartment here for several months, in late 66, early 67. Jim and his girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham, had the bottom of the apartment and held lots of parties here, inviting all the rock stars of the 60s you can think of. Also had a rather stormy relationship. In the end, Jimmy and Kathy were evicted from the apartment due to all the noise they were making with their parties and their rows. There's a picture of Jimmy in the apartment in 1967, seemingly making himself a meal in the kitchen, where every man is that. Part of a day-in-the-life photo shoot that Jimmy did here. I love that one. This is quite a famous picture taken on the other side of the road by the railings. It's now the Swedish Embassy. This picture is so famous, this street sign kept on being written on that it was stolen. So I then replaced it and put it quite high on the wall, as you can see. Much harder to get off from up there, I'm sure. Well, after Jimmy moved out of the apartment, it was quite quiet for a year or so. But all that changed in mid-68 when John and Yoko moved in. They just got together, looking for a big house of their own, or looking at Ringo's apartment. But just after they moved in, that John Lennon rang up Tony Bramwell, worked for the Beatles company Apple, and asked Tony to come along to the apartment with a camera. Tony thought to be taking pictures of John and Yoko, so I'll leave the camera behind, come back a few hours later, collect the camera and get the film developed. When you say Tony was rather surprised when he saw the content of the film. John and Yoko completely stark naked. He's even more surprised when John told him this is our new album cover. It's the front cover of their album Unfinished Music Volume 1, The Two Virgins. And when the chairman of EMI Records, Sir Joseph Lockwood, saw the proposed Two Virgins picture, he virtually had a heart attack. That's the problems it would cause, and the album came out. Good full frontal nudity on album covers was rather uncommon in those days. Guess it would be today as well. And Paul McCartney, ever the PR man of the Beatles, had the same reaction when he saw it. So John and Yoko were summoned over to a meeting with Sir Joe to explain themselves, and Paul went along too. When they got there, Sir Joe asked them, "Why on earth are you doing this?" To which John replied, "We're doing this for artistic reasons. Shocking people is an art form," he said. But this Sir Joe got really angry. He said to John and Yoko, "Doing this for artistic reasons? You'd at least get two better looking bodies on your album cover." Then turning towards Paul, he said, "Why don't you get Paul to do it? He's far prettier than you are. Or get a statue from the park." Anything but that. But not surprisingly, it's lots of anger and embarrassment all round. Joseph Lockwood refused to bring out the album with that cover, and John refused to change it. So in the end, John had to go to the Who's management team for the album to be released by their company, Track Records. Even then, it was sold in a brown paper bag, so people couldn't see the offending contents inside. But just after the album came out, John and Yoko were still rather unwelcome, knocking on the door early one morning. When John opened the door, acquainted with 8 policemen with search warrants to search the place for drugs. Apparently John was tipped off by a journalist friend a few days before the police were going to come. So he cleaned out the whole apartment to make sure there was nothing there. So imagine John's shock when the police found a very small quantity of drugs. John said that to his death the drugs did not belong to him. He thought to belong to previous occupants. I mean, Jimi Hendrix lived there for a start. Not impossible, is it? It's more than likely, though, they belonged to the policeman that came. Ran in the police team that day, as Sergeant Norman Pilcher was actually arrested and put in prison himself later on for planting drugs on victims. This was rather corrupt, to say the least. Also just so happened that a reporter and photographer for the News of the World newspaper happened to be passing by when John was being arrested. Just passing by, huh? What are the chances of that? As you know, News of the World was closed down recently due to the phone hacking scandal, also making illegal payments to police officers for information, going on for quite a while now by the sound of it. Here's a picture of John being led away down the steps here by 2 plainclothes policemen after being busted, as photographed by the News of the World. When John appeared in court, though, he actually pleaded guilty to drugs possession. The reason being, Yoko was heavily pregnant at the time, as she lost her baby soon afterwards, at least partly due to the stress. Being a foreign national, might have been deported. John would be guilty to the charge if Yoko was kept off it. It's only fined £150, very small amount of money, of course, rather rich Beatle. And he thought it was the end of the matter. Boy, was he wrong. It was in 1971, John and Yoko moved to America and settled in New York. They got heavily involved in various political campaigns, including the campaign to stop the Vietnam War, and also the campaign trying to stop President Nixon getting re-elected in 1972. Well, Nixon wasn't too happy about this, so other means are possible to get re-elected. Watergate, for instance. Memo was sent from the White House to the FBI, asking to try and find a way of getting John out of America. Prepped for John's criminal records, found this drugs conviction, thought the excuse they needed. Deportation order was placed on John. But John didn't want to leave, wanted to make America his home. It's a huge campaign to help John stay, even led by the then mayor in New York. It took John about 4 years. He got his green card, allowing to stay permanently. During that time, he didn't leave America. Guess was allowed back in again. Never came back for the rest of his life. See how much trouble this drugs conviction caused John later on. I want to show you something a bit rude now, so if you're easily offended, look away now. Anyone? This is what Private Eye magazine made of the Two Virgins album cover on the drugs bus. Also have a topical picture with a funny caption. This is this is a great example.
Oh my God.
Little sticker covering John's private parts reads, "Member of the British Empire." That's what MBE stands for. Got the medal biscuit a few years earlier. Different meaning as well, of course. Little speech balloon came to John's mouth reads, "It's no good, officer. He won't stand up in court." The drugs bust. Of course they're talking about whatever else.
Yeah.
I should say when John was convicted of drugs offence, Ringo was forced to sell the apartment by the landlords. So in the Beatles were for a short time. Gave it full place during those few years, wasn't it? I say here it's Yoko. I unveiled the blue plaque to John here, about, 8 years ago. It was at the unveiling. Yoko was very emotional when she came here. The first time she'd been back, actually, since 1968 when they moved out. It was a very nice moment. It's in the apartment a long time, looking around her old place. When he'd come out, Yoko spotted a couple standing on the corner there, just as John and Yoko were in their wedding day. The guy wearing a white suit, the lady a white mini dress. Yoko spotted the couple, got out the car, went to talk to them for a long time, posted pictures as well. That was rather nice. I met Yoko a few times. She's actually a very charming lady when you meet her. I wasn't expecting that myself, but actually she's a very charming lady when you meet her. Okay, the next place we're going to see is where the Beatles had a rather strange shop on Baker Street called Apple. Of course, there's a great photo opportunity here. If you want to take a picture, please do. Baker Street. Of course, it's world famous, being the home of Sherlock Holmes. Number 221B Baker Street is in that direction. Now, not surprisingly, a Sherlock Holmes museum. The characters, of course, fictional, but the street very much real, as is the address. Well, anyway, the street also famous for the Beatles in the 60s, for the building across the road there, now Marsh and Parsons estate agents. It's a bit different though, and the Beatles owned it. It looked rather more like this. A bit more colourful, I'm sure you'll agree. This is the site of the Beatles' first Apple project. Their shop here on Baker Street, just called Apple. The shop basically sold clothes and things the Beatles liked. And both the mural and the clothes sold inside were designed, this group of Dutch designers who called themselves the Fool. Here wearing some of the clothes used to sell in the shop. Quite a hippie bunch, aren't they? And the Beatles got their wives to pose for this poster for the shop, again wearing some of the clothes. That's Patty Harrison, Cynthia Lennon, Maureen Starkey, Ringo's first wife, and in front is Jenny Boyd. Jenny is Patty's sister. She worked in the shop for a while. One day she was working in here, Donovan came in, and they started talking. They became great friends. Donovan later wrote the song Jennifer Juniper about Jenny Boyd, who met in the shop for the first time. Unfortunately, the shop was not a great success. For a start, the mural wasn't exactly very popular. The local shop owners didn't like it at all. Wasn't really in keeping with the rest of the area. More importantly though, didn't have planning permission from the local council. So the council insisted it be painted over. So it lasted a few weeks. Bit of a shame really, that it certainly brightens up the area, don't you think? But the shop didn't last much longer than the mural. To start, the Beatles ran in a rather strange manner. The manager of the shop was Pete Shotton, John's great friend from school. Also a founder member of the Quarrymen, John's first band. It seems that Pete wanted to run the shop normal commercial way, but the Beatles didn't. So apparently the fool who designed the clothes wanted hand-woven silk labels in each garment. The labels cost more to produce than most of the clothes. And Pete was horrified by this, went to John Lennon to complain. But John just said to Pete, remember Pete, we're not business freaks, we're doing this as artists. The fool can do what they like. There's no way it could be started a profit. Also because of the rather dim psychedelic lighting in the shop, and almost total lack of security, it's absolute shoplifter's paradise. Much of the stock was stolen before it could be sold. Didn't help being the Beatles store, of course. People wanted souvenirs and weren't always ready to pay for them. So in the end they got really fed up with the place, decided to close it down. Having normal closing down sale, they did something rather different. On the last day, the doors of the shop were just left open. Anyone could come in off the street and take what they like without paying for it. Well, actually, people have been doing this for several months anyway, so nothing much had really changed. When word got around, giving away all the clothes, well, lots of people came along to try and get their hands on them. These are the scenes outside the shop of the mass Apple giveaway. Absolute pandemonium. Literally fighting to get into the shop. You can see two policemen here trying to keep order. Really fighting a losing battle. It's chaos inside as well. My good friend Jenny Crowley used to work here. Was working on that last day. Got off a chair to serve a customer. Went back to her chair. The chair had gone. Someone had taken that as well. Everyone nailed down was taken that day, it seems. Not surprisingly, when the Beatles closed the shop, they sold the building too. Now you've got the estate agents where the shop used to be, and above there, the Beatles had their first Apple offices. It's now an apartment block called the Apple Apartments. Nothing to do with the Beatles anymore. Seems to be working for the new owners though. There's 5 apartments in all. Sold the whole lot recently for £10 million. £2 million an apartment. A lot of money in this expensive area. The apartments were launched about 5 years ago, on the anniversary of the shop closing. And on that day, the current owners projected the original mural back on the building again. It was an idea the Beatles had when asked to paint it over. Didn't have the technology in those days, of course they do now, so it looked briefly with the mural back on the building again. This is only for that one night though, to launch the new apartments. Should be a regular feature. When you put up the blue commemorative plaque to John Lennon and George Harrison, quite high on the building. Just say it's only to them. These are memorial plaques. That's why it's only to them, not the other Beatles. Okay, the next place we're going to see is where Paul McCartney lived with Jane Asher, his long-term girlfriend of the 60s, and where John and Paul wrote many songs. Gonna walk with a nice Pleasanton Street Gardens to get there. Very nice garden area. But a David Bowie connection. This is David Bowie standing right here by this very bush, in fact. This was taken probably around 1968, so it's like a year before Space Oddity, his first big hit. But I lived in this area. This is their manager, Ken Pitt. He's very much a regular in the gardens. This was taken on one of those occasions at a photo shoot here.
David Bowie.
Yeah, I suppose there's a slight Beatle connection because Bowie was a great friend of John Lennon's. They did the song Fame together in 1974, so slight connection there. But anyway, good excuse to stop anyway. David Bowie right here. In the 1960s, it's the family home of the Asher family. Richard Asher was a well-known doctor, and his wife Margaret, professor of music at the Guildhall School of Music, used to teach her students in a music room down in the basement here. Very musical family. All their children were entertainers of sorts. Of course, their son Peter Asher was part of Peter and Gordon, the famous duo of the 60s. They had many hits. Lots of those, of course, Lennon and McCartney songs. Reason had their songs to record was Peter's sister Jane was dating Paul McCartney. Certainly helped keep in the family, as it were. The called Jane Asher is a famous actress, been acting since at least 5 years old. By the time she was 17 and met Paul, already appeared in many films and television shows, such celebrity in her own right. In April 1963, Jane did a photographic assignment for the Radio Times Listings magazine at a concert at the Royal Albert Hall, where the Beatles topped the bill. She's photographed in the Radio Times, screaming at the Beatles. She met them all backstage. In fact, George and Paul liked her. She got better with Paul. And they started dating soon afterwards. It wasn't long after that, the Asher family invited Paul to live here. Must be a liberal family for those days, letting their daughter's boyfriend live in the family home. Actually, Paul lived here for about 3 years. And while Paul lived here, good John Lennon came here too to write songs with Paul. Lots of those songs are written down in Mrs. Asher's music room, down in the basement here. Must have been sort of late summer 1963. John and Paul wrote a song down here, nose to nose at 2 pianos, as John Lennon once put it. After they finished the song, Paul McCartney asked Peter Asher to come into the music room. Later, John and Paul played him the song. Then they asked him, was it any good? He said, yes, that's a pretty good song, really. But not surprisingly, it's got to want to hold your hand. Aww. Peter Asher might have been the first to hear it, not the last by any means. It became the Beatles' first #1 in America, early 1964. We started the British invasion, as everyone called it. Well, our very famous Paul McCartney song started out here, when he studied early one morning, when Paul woke up in his bedroom, at the top of the house at the back, with a tune in his head. Paul went to the piano here by the bed to play the tune. This is what's remembering the tune from someone else's. For the next few months, went around all his friends, playing this tune to them, see if anyone knew what it was. In fact, it drove people mad, playing it to them time and time again. But finally, Paul was persuaded. It wasn't anyone else's. He must have dreamt it in his sleep. Because for a long time, he'd written the tune and he'd proper words to it. Original working title was Scrambled Eggs. But the first line went, scrambled eggs, baby, how I love your legs. That thinks so, Paul. I can go around to rewriting the lyrics. A good job too. She called it Yesterday. The most famous Paul McCartney song. It's been recorded by about 3,000 people since 1965 and played on American radio some 8 million times. In fact, you can see Paul's handwritten lyrics of Yesterday in the British Library. It's in the Treasures of the British Library section, next to the writings of Dickens, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Handel's Messiah, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and the Magna Carta. It's a good job. Go around to writing the words. Don't think scrambled eggs bit have been in there, do you? Paul and Jane moved out of the house here in 1966 into Paul's new place in Cavendish Avenue, St John's Wood. Actually, Paul still lives to this day. Of course, not with Jane Asher. So they broke up in 1968. I think they realised that just the two of them didn't have that much in common. Paul especially loved the Asher family, being in a family atmosphere, but just the two of the rest didn't have that much in common. They broke up and went on to marry Linda, and Jane married famous cartoonist Ringo Starr. Best internationally for his work with Pink Floyd on the film The Wall. But Jane is still acting to this day, regularly appears on stage and screen. Ever since she broke up with Paul McCartney, never talked about Paul in public. No books, no interviews, nothing. Good for her. Could have made a fortune out of some kiss and tell. What's she known as an actress, one of Paul McCartney's ex. Here is Jane around the time she met Paul. Most certainly this picture was taken in the house. The Regent family, the Asher family. See by the decor. Okay, the next place we're going to see is that the Beatles did a scene for Help, their second film in 1965. Get time for pictures here first, if you like. Go across the road there, that we're at a great restaurant now called Dalesford. For a long time was an Indian restaurant called the Dolphin. But for one day in 1965, it changed its name to the Rajahama and features in the Beatles' second film, Help. This is how the restaurant looked in the film. The restaurant's changed quite a bit, but the building at the end, the white building there, kept very much the same, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the plot of Help is that Ringo is sent a ring by a fan, which gets stuck on his finger. Trouble is for Ringo, and caught wearing this ring is likely to be sacrificed, a dreaded Kaili, some sort of religious sect or whatever. Of course, the Beatles are very keen to find out more about the ring, so they come to the restaurant for our nearest Easterner to tell them something about it. When they arrive here, though, there's a couple of guys outside. Just as they're from the east, they're actually from London. And Ringo says they're from the west. This guy answers, no, not from the east, Stepney. Stepney's in East London, if you didn't know. Covered in joke for Londoners. Here is Ringo, so-called Easterners in the film. Well, the Beatles go into the restaurant and have a meal. But unfortunately, the folks of the dreaded Kaili catch up with them, knock out all the staff of the restaurant and take their place. During the fights, lots of strange things end up in the Beatles soup. King a pair of glasses and a season ticket. Get it? Seasoning in soup. Oh dear. This is a great fun film and great music too. And here's John, one of the season tickets for me soup. Just say all the interior scenes are done in the film studio. Just film the outside for the film itself. But it could be said during this scene that George Harrison's life really changed. Because during it, there's lots of Indian musicians playing. During a break in the filming, George picked up their instruments, a sitar, having a go at playing it. He couldn't really play it very well, but he loved the sound it made and he bought his own sitar soon afterwards. Not long after that, he got in touch with Ravi Shankar, that's the most famous sitar player in the world. George spent several weeks in India in 1966, now to play the sitar properly, being taught by Ravi. Of course, while in India, George fell in love with the place. Indian culture, religion and music being part of George's life from then on. Of course, he also inspired the other Beatles to go to India in 1968 to study transcendental meditation with the Maharishi. You could say the Beatles' Indian period started with this scene in Help, when George picked up the sitar. That's the Paul and Ringo still meditate to this day, so they got very influenced by meditation especially. Okay, and I should say it's a great film out called George Harrison Living in the Material World. It's a great documentary by Martin Scorsese. And it features all this Indian stuff and everything else about George. So it's actually streaming on Netflix at the moment, so we'll look out for that really good documentary. Okay, in a moment we're going to walk down towards Baker Street Underground Station, go on the train that's to St John's Wood, see the outside of Abbey Road Studios, let's walk across the famous Abbey Road crossing. This way.
First ride on the tube. Is this our train?
Some drivers aren't really good at letting people on the train. That's what they do, is they don't have to drive the train anymore.
Steep right up the tube.
86 single called Press on a train on the Jubilee line. So past the journey we just done. Right, here's that shop I was telling you about, Helter Skelter. It sells lots of Beatles souvenirs. Come back here if you like. Let's walk down to Abbey Road. Folks, as you've probably guessed by now, this is Abbey Road. Recognise the crossing from somewhere else. Which has seen it right here on the front cover of the Abbey Road album. The picture was taken by a guy called Ian Macmillan, who's standing on a step ladder in the middle of the road, just about here, on August the 8th, 1969. It's looking that way to Abbey Road itself, with the Beatles walking towards us across the crossing from the other side. So you all can see here on the picture, the white wall here, is the wall of Abbey Road Studios itself. Over there, all the writing on, more of that in a moment. And on this side of the road, see the tops of the buildings through the trees, up on this side. This wasn't going to be the cover of the record at all. In fact, it's going to be called Abbey Road. Original title was going to be Everest, named after the favourite brand of cigarettes smoked by Jeff Emmerich, the Beatles recording engineer. But someone had the bright idea the Beatles should go to Mount Everest to shoot the album cover. I won't tell you what they said to that idea. It's rather rude. Needless to say, didn't go to Mount Everest to change the title to Abbey Road and shot the picture on the crossing virtually outside the studio it was recorded in. Certainly a lot nearer, warmer and cheaper than going to Mount Everest. But ever since the Beatles posed on the crossing, millions of other people have as well. There's people on the crossing virtually every hour of every day. Lots of people go across barefoot, just as Paul McCartney did. Original picture. Some of the so-called clues about Paul being dead. There are a bizarre rumour that spread across the world like wildfire in 1969. Rumour was basically that Paul had actually died in a car accident in 1966, and the Beatles had got an imposter to take Paul's place in the band, so their fame be affected. Also, the Beatles have felt rather guilty about doing this, so put various clues on album covers and on songs to the fact that Paul was really dead. Lots of these so-called clues can be found on the Abbey Road picture. This is supposed to be Paul McCartney's funeral procession, with George Harrison dressed as the gravedigger, Ringo Starr, the undertaker, and John Lennon, the preacher. And that Paul is wearing an old suit and he's barefoot. Supposedly how bodies are buried. We have a body. What's not explained is why Paul is walking to his own funeral. It's another story altogether, I guess. There's another theory about Paul. Some people said, look, Paul's holding his cigarette in his right hand. But sure, the real Paul McCartney is left-handed. They assume wrongly, of course, this guy in the picture isn't Paul at all, but must be the imposter, a guy they call William Campbell. They also said wanted the alias Billy Shears. Hence on Sergeant Pepper seemed introducing a new singer to the band. All very silly, of course. There's also interest about the Volkswagen Beetle car parked by the crossing, especially the car's license plate. The second part of the license plate reads 2H1F. If you believe the rumour, 28IF. This is supposed to signify that Paul McCartney would have been 28 years old if he was still alive. Well, actually, he was only 27 in 1969, so well, never mind. Well, I could go on for hours about the rumour. There's so many different clues. Be here all day telling them all. In fact, there's books written about the subject. But these so-called clues is to be explained away. There's nothing that strange about their clothes, for a start. The Volkswagen car, well, that belongs in an Abbey house, the apartment block the other side. The guy's having to park his car by the crossing that day. He probably regretted it though. His license plate was stolen by Beatles fans for years afterwards. That's the case though, got his own back. The car sold at auction in the 1980s, about £2,500. He should have kept it though. More recently it sold for £11,000. It's now in the Volkswagen Museum in Germany. It's now a museum piece, just as parked by the crossing that day. There's the power of the Beatles for you. The reason that Paul's having his shoes on was simple really. It's a very hot day. But Paul arrived at the session wearing sandals. I took them off for the last couple of shots. Here's an alternate Abbey Road picture going the other way across. This time you can see that Paul has still got his sandals on. If you use that picture instead, that clue won't happen at all, because you can't see Paul's cigarette, nor the so-called clues. But it's only comparatively recently that Paul had the last laugh on the whole thing. He called a recent album Paul is Live. Not Paul is Dead, Paul is Live. For the front cover they superimposed Paul with original Abbey Road pictures. Took the other Beatles out, but kept on the Volkswagen car. But changed the license plate. This time it's not read 28 if. This time it reads 51 is. Paul's age when this picture was taken. It's Paul's way of saying he's very much still alive and still making records. Just to prove it, Paul was here just last summer. He did a special concert in Studio 2, Abbey Road Studios, before he came and posed on the crossing. Here is Paul on the Abbey Road crossing just a few months ago. So you can look, as he said, I'm wearing sandals, I'm not barefoot, I'm very much still alive. That's what he said before he did the concert. Abbey Road Studios reckon about 300,000 people come here every year to have their picture taken. It's nearly 1,000 a day. And some people aren't very clever. I've seen people lying down on the crossing before, having their picture taken with cars coming towards them. Not a great idea if you want to get up again. I've seen people going across naked. That was done in Red Hot Chili Peppers. Did that a while ago. Seen some nice things as well. Just doing my tour a few weeks ago, there's a young couple on the tour. They went to the middle of the crossing. Guy got down on one knee, proposed marriage to his girlfriend right in the middle of the crossing. I'm glad to say she said yes. It's the first engagement I had on my tour. That was rather nice. It could have been the shortest engagement of all time. Some car drivers aren't very patient, to say the least. Seriously, there have been accidents and the people have been hit by cars here in the past, having their picture taken and say, be careful on the crossing. Remember, the Beatles had the police stop the traffic for them. Well, they went across. You don't have that privilege. Be careful on the crossing. We're going to finish off the tour just down the road outside Abbey Road Studios itself. Come back and take pictures here when we finish. Finish off, guys. Before the Beatles came here, the likes of Glenn Miller, Fred Astaire, even Winston Churchill came here. So the Beatles put the place on the map. Almost literally. They weren't called Abbey Road in those days. They're called EMI, and after the record company that owned it. And he changed his name officially to Abbey Road long after the album came out. The Beatles actually named their album after the road. The studios followed suit. It's that way round. Well, the Beatles first came here on June the 6th, 1962. Their first recording session with George Martin. They sang many songs for George that day, and later on, listening to all the songs in the control room, when George gave a long lecture on how to make records. Then he said to them, OK, I've had my say, now you tell me, is there anything you don't like? And he was talking about the music, but George Harrison's reply was, for a start, I don't like your tie. What a thing to say on your first recording session, George. Lucky George Martin had a sense of humour. That really broke the ice between them. Got on famously after that, called George Martin Producing. Ever since the Beatles started coming here, of course fans have come as well. You see from the wall, it's almost customary to leave messages to them here. This wall's painted over about 6 times a year. Keeping a clean wall to write on. Right to the wet paint sites, but get repainted now. Putting signs up, it's going to be painted the next few minutes. So you want to take a picture of the wall with all the graffiti on, do it now before it's painted over. The wall must be about several inches thicker since it was built. There's so many coats of paint over the years. Give a bit of geography in the studio. The front part here, just the foyer and the admin block. The studios themselves are to the back and to the side. This is more obvious in this picture here. The aerial picture of the studios. You can see all the studios numbered to the back. They've actually built studios in the back garden of a former house. See how big the place is. Well, the biggest studio here by far is Studio 1, which is here on the picture. It's the brick building sticking out to the left. It's the main orchestral studio, normally used by large orchestras. It's also the Beatles recorded All You Need Is Love on June the 25th, 1967. In front of a worldwide television audience, at least 400 million people. It's on the world's first TV satellite link-ups. Very much an historic occasion. This is a picture of the Beatles in the studio that day, with their very psychedelic gear, of course. It was the summer of love, after all, the summer of '67 and all that. But studio pictures mostly was Studio 2. Fortunately, we can't see from the front. It's behind the White House and juts out to the right. This is a picture of the Beatles in Studio 2 during the recording of Sgt. Pepper in 1967. They've actually kept the recording area looking pretty much the same to this day. It's been said it's like a shrine to the Beatles. The actual reason is it works as a studio. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If they change it around too much, with amazing acoustics in there. But some of the instruments you can see in the picture are still in use in the studio now. The organ that George has seen playing, that's still there. This piano's still there too. Some of the security in the 60s, or the lack of it, puts a chair over the bar, the door, try to keep people out. And it didn't work. The Beatles recording session was supposed to be a secret, but their fans will find out about them. Some more intrepid fans will actually break into the studio, fanning false ceilings and in cupboards, and places like that, and interrupt recording sessions. One occasion, though, the fans became rather useful. It's in February in 1968, when the Beatles were recording the song Across the Universe. It was late at night when John Lennon decided he'd like to use some female singers on backing vocals. Where you get singers from that time of night? Lucky John remembered about the fans. He asked Paul to come out. Lucky there was still some here, some fans here. Went up to the fans to ask them, can any of you sing? Luckily 2 of them answered yes. Their names were Gayleen and Lizzie. So then Paul said, well, please come inside the studio and sing with us. That's called a no-brainer question. Because the fans said yes, went inside, met the heroes, and sang backing vocals on a Beatles song. Bet they were glad they came along that day. Home in the studio, let alone to sing with the Beatles, but they did. But unfortunately, we can't go inside ourselves today, because it's still very much a working studio. For ex-recording, you're not for tours, we have to stay outside. There's a nice picture of the Beatles on the steps of the studio leading up to the main entrance. It was taken in March 1963, the same day they recorded From Me to You and Thank You Girl, their 3rd single. And as a contrast, here they are on the steps, the same day the Abbey Road album cover picture. How much they changed from 1963 to 1969. This is a picture I took of Paul McCartney on the steps in 1997. Doing his classical piece, Standing Stone. It was great seeing Paul here at Abbey Road. We do lots of great things in the studio to this day. You still get rock and pop acts recording here, because the 1970s were dominated by Pink Floyd. Did albums like Dark Side of the Moon here. The 1990s, Radiohead do reckon their albums, OK Computer and the Bends. Must have been about 15 years ago now. U2 and Green Day were here together, recording the song called The Saints Are Coming. Did especially for the victims, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Let's come off to pose on the Abbey Road crossing. These U2 and Green Day to be in the middle of Abbey Road. Who did the music of big budget films here? This is the Guardian newspaper. Had this great mock-up of film characters on the Abbey Road crossing. There's Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, the Stormtrooper from Star Wars, Ripley from the Aliens films. All those films that are done inside the studio. It's still very much Beatles central too. Even the Beatles are still done here. Call the music for the new film 8 days a week. The Beatles touring years. All done here by Giles Martin, George Martin's son. Kevin and Dad's doing Beatles stuff here. We did the remixes of Sgt. Pepper and the White Album, their 50th anniversary releases in the last couple of years. I guess his next big project's going to be the Abbey Road album, because September is the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road, and we're certainly going to be an anniversary re-release of that. Paul McCartney was here recently too. Did some work on his new album, Egypt Station, in the studio. We did a special concert in Studio 2 just last summer. But you can see that concert on Spotify. They've got a video streaming service on Spotify. The studio's a big website on the internet, abbeyroad.com. Part of that website is a webcam.
Do it again. The other leg. All right. About face. Do it there. Like.
Also ich sehe das online war. Also so,